Today's daf is number 60, Samach, page 60 in Ketubot. And we are on the top words, actually. So we're having a discussion, a very interesting discussion today. It'll be a little easier than previous days, so it's a good thing we do it in the morning. About nursing, about babies needing to nurse. So the Mishnah, the Braita yesterday said that a woman has a responsibility as part of her responsibilities of marriage to nurse a child that she has. There was a machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Right? Beit Shammai said there was not a responsibility. A lot of echo. And Beit Hillel said there was. And the question was for how long, right? So we didn't get to how long yet. We got to yesterday where we said if the child recognizes the mother, right? Let's say they get divorced, then the mother does not have to nurse her child. It's the husband's responsibility to find a nursemaid. That's what it's called, wet nurse. I don't know the difference. Yeah,
I think it's the same.
Nursemaid sounds descriptive, right? I guess, but either way. And then we said that if the child recognizes the mother, then the mother has to do it, right? Because the child won't nurse easily from somebody else. So says the Gemara on top today, ad kama, how much time does it take for an infant to recognize its mother? Now this Gemara doesn't make so much sense to me, not being a mother or an infant, because I would imagine it would be a very short amount of time, but the Gemara does not make that assumption, right? The Gemara says, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, the top line, Shlosha Chadashim, takes 3 months. So if the infant is 3 months old, then it recognizes its mother. But if, let's say, the mother gets divorced when the infant's 2 months old, you could just take that infant and go feed it with somebody else because it's not attached to its mother yet, which again seems a little bit bizarre to me. But that's what the Gemara seemed to assume was a good enough time, 3 months. Shmuel says Shloshim Yom. Shmuel says 30 days. The Gemara's going to ask on Shmuel, how could that be? It seems too short, which again, I don't really understand it so well. And Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yochanan says 50 Yom, 50 days. And Amar Rav Simya bar Abaye, halacha Rav Yitzchak Shamru Shem Rav Yochanan, that's the halacha, 50 days. So that if the infant is with its mother for 50 days, then it's attached to its mother. I mean, not attached to its mother in general, but attached to its mother's milk specifically. And then you can't swap out and hire somebody else. Says the Gemara on the 5th line, Bishlam Rav Rabbi Yochanan. Well, I understand Rav Rabbi Yochanan, one who said 3 months, one who said 50 days. Kol chad v'chad ki horfei. It all depends on the sharpness of the child, meaning how quickly does the child get attached. But what about Shmuel? Said 30 days. It's such a short time. Shmuel, do you ever find that a child really gets attached after only 30 days? Again, I'm sure James is not here because I'm sure he has better experience with this, knowing in reality, like I don't actually know. Maybe it is the case, right? That infants, obviously their brains are still developing and they have not a lot of memory. And maybe, a couple of days away from a woman, they just latch onto someone else. I don't actually know practical what it is, but the Gemara seems to think that 30 days was a very short time to assume that it would be. And says the Gemara, therefore, Kiata Rami bar Yecheskel, Amar, Rami bar Yecheskel came and said, my brother, Rami bar Yecheskel, had a brother named Yehuda bar Yecheskel, and his brother Yehuda, who was Rabbi Yehuda, or one of the Rabbi Yehudas, quoted Shmuel a lot, and Rami said, don't listen to any of these things my brother says in the name of Shmuel. Right? These brothers were competitive. Right, my brother does not really tell you things accurately with Shmei de Shmuel, right? Meaning he misquotes a lot of things. Hachi Amar Shmuel, in fact, what Shmuel said was Kozman Shemakira. As long as the infant recognizes the mother, then the mother has to nurse the baby. But once the infant, if it's too short a time, and again, what the question of how short that time is, it seems like they assumed it was somewhere around 2 months. But obviously some infants are more precocious than others, and some are slower, and some seem to care about their mothers, or we always know this. Some infants seem to be very attached, some are less attached. I don't exactly know what it depends on. But it's an individual. It depends on whether the infant recognizes and is attached to his mother or her mother. Now, how do you know that? You can't ask the kid, right? So how do you determine that? So there's a case. Listen to this one. It's a beautiful case. How would you think you would determine that? Says the Gemara, there was a woman who was divorced, who had an infant, who didn't want to nurse her infant, and she came in front of Shmuel and said, Shmuel, look, I don't feel that attached to this baby. It's responsibility of my ex-husband. I don't want to take care of this kid. And Amar Lei the Rav Dimi Bar Yosef, so Shmuel said to his student, I guess, Rav Dimi Bar Yosef, Zil Batka, go and check. Go and check if this infant is attached to its mother yet. If the infant's attached, she has to keep nursing it, even though she's divorced. And if it's not attached, the husband has to the father has to hire a wet nurse. So how do you test? So also utfa bedari dinashli. So they went and they made a row of women, a lineup, right? So a bunch of women who are nursing age, I guess, or nursing capability. Vishakle libra, and they took this kid and they walked him down the road, down the lineup. The kamahadrele alayu, and they walked past all of them. They were mahader, right? So they walked this kid by to see when the kid would stare at a woman, and Miriam's going to technically challenge there. Kamahadrele alayu, and they wanted to view when the kid would look at one of the women. Kimata legaba, when the child got to its mother, havi kamasvi la'ape. It was looking at her face, right? The child stared and recognized his mother. She did not actually want to keep nursing this child, and so she looked down, right, to try to not make eye contact with the cute baby. She hid her eyes from the baby. Amarla, they said to her, it's your baby. Nataf incha, raise your eyes, kum dari brich, go and nourish your child. Meaning, the fact that this child chose you out in the lineup means that the child recognizes you and is familiar with you, and you have a responsibility to feed the child. Remember, we saw yesterday the husband has to pay her, right? It's not that she has to do it out of the goodness of her heart, even though it's her kid, right? It's because it's the father's responsibility to feed a child, and if she's feeding the child for the father and they're no longer married, then he has to pay her whatever nourishment she needs. But nonetheless, we force her to do it because the child is connected to her. Now, what about a summa? What if the baby was blind, right? What if the baby can't see? So how would you do this with a baby if you say it's all dependent on sight? Minayada, Amarvashi, well, it's not sight. The way a kid recognizes its mother is not by looking at her eyes necessarily. It's berecha, ubetam, it's by smelling her, by tasting her. There's a lot of other senses that are involved. And so it's not just looking at her. Certainly a baby, even without sight, would be able to connect to and recognize its mother.
The smell is one of the most important, actually, connection from the mother to the child.
Great. Yeah. And so I think, but that's the smell of the mother.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's how you would do it. And again, and the taste also, right? So I don't know if you would have the child taste the mother's milk or taste it out of the mother, but either way, you'd be able to sort of have simanim for this to recognize whether the child is connected to the mother. And again, at the end of this Gemara, it's basically says that it's individualized, right? But it gives a pretty wide range. And again, I was a little surprised by the range it was given, because I would have thought that most infants would be connected to their mothers much less than 90 days, right? So, but either they didn't know, and that's not clear, or maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I don't actually, never quite tested this out. Continues the Gemara, we're at the 2 dots now, on Daf Samach Amud Aleph, around 15 lines down. Tanura Banan, says the Braita, how long does the woman have to nurse her child for, right? So the Mishnah said that a mother who's married, and maybe if she's unmarried, she's divorced as well, has to nurse her child, right? For how long? So what's the responsibility? Tanura Banan, says the Braita and the Tosefta, Yonek tinok v'holech ad 24 chodesh. A woman should nurse, or has to nurse, or can nurse, different versions here, can nurse her child for 24 months. But mikan ve'elech, after 24 months, ki yonek sheketz. It's as if she's nursing him with a something that's tameh. A sheketz is an impure bug. And now we think the implication of this is that milk is not kosher, right? And that the baby should not be drinking the mother's milk beyond the time that the baby needs to drink the mother's milk. Now, we're going to ask on that because the halacha is that milk is kosher. Milk of a human is kosher, midoraita. Not midrabanan, but midoraita. So we're going to ask all these questions. But the Braita says that you can nurse, or you should nurse your child for 24 months, but after that, it's inappropriate. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua says, no way, nurse the child as long as the kid needs to. Afil arba chamesh shanim, even 4 or 5 years, if the kid still is nursing and still getting nourishment from its mother, that's fine. Now, what if you're piresh? What if the baby's weaned? Maybe stops nursing, right? So la'achar esrim v'arba chodesh. after 24 months, even according to Rabbi Yoshua, after 24 months, if the baby stops nursing and then a month later decides, you know what, I really like that, and wants to go back and do it, that's not appropriate. If they're then chazar, that's kiyonik sheketz. Then it's as if you are nursing an impure thing, okay? That's the bright. Says the Gemara, well, how do you understand this, right? So if Amar, first thing the Breita says is that according to Rabbi Eliezer, you nurse your child for 24 months. Beyond that, mikan be'elef kiyonik sheketz, implying that it's prohibited, that you're not allowed to drink a mother's milk, human milk. But there's a problem because the Breita disagrees with that. The Breita says the following. Yachol, you might think, this is obviously a very important practical question, I don't know, practical, but realistic question. Yachol yechelev malchei shtayim tameh. You might have thought that the milk of those that walk on two legs is tameh. It's a fascinating Gemara, right? Because malchei shtayim to us in this room refers to people. But there is a very cute and interesting Pirush in the Mishnah, where one of the Mefarshim, the what's his name, the one in the Mishnah. Anyways, it'll come to me. Talks about that maybe Malchei Shtayim is specific, not just humans, but even other animals that are other primates that walk on two legs, right? So it might not be specific, which is an interesting thing, because if you think about it, the Torah never really quite addresses animals that are primates, maybe because think of many reasons why, but it's the Tiferet Yisrael, who's one of the big Mefarshim on the Mishnah. He talks about an orangutan in this Mishnah. Anyways, our Breita says, you might have thought that the milk of a human or of a person a thing that walks on 2 feet is tamei, meaning it's not permitted to drink, like milk of a pig, right? And in fact, it seemed to be a kal v'chomer. Ma behema, think about it, an animal which walks on 4 legs, right? Shehikalta b'maga'a. There's no tuma in touching an animal. You can touch any animal, a pig, a kosher animal, not kosher animal, right? Any animal that you touch is not mitame, right? When it's alive, when it's alive. But it's milk you can't drink. You're not allowed to drink the milk of an impure animal. Now, you are allowed to drink the milk of a pure animal, just to be clear, so don't get nervous. But you're not allowed to drink the milk of an impure animal. And as we remember from yesterday, oat milk is not milk, right? So, but you're not allowed to drink the milk of an impure animal, even though you can touch an impure animal. But Adam, think about a person. There are many people who are alive you can't touch. A nida, a zav, all kinds of tumah with people that affect them when they're alive. So there's reasons why you couldn't touch them. But so look, you can't even touch the person. Certainly you can't drink their milk. Says the Gemara, you would have thought that, but it's wrong. Talmud Lomar, the Torah says by the camel, et ha-gamal, you can't eat the gamal. Why? Ki maleh gera, who even though it is maleh gera, right? Tameh, because it's not mafreset parsa, right? Remember the gamal, the camel chews its cud, but it doesn't have split hooves, right? So the Torah says that a gamal is tameh, right? And we darshan from the word who. It says ki malat gera who, that it. Now why you can just say ki malat gera? Why the extra who? It. To tell you who tameh, that it is tameh, the camel is tameh, and its milk is tameh. The ein chelev malchei shtayim tameh, but the milk of a biped, that's what it's called, right? A human is not tameh, elo tahor. So milk of a human is okay. Yachol tziyat chelev. Now maybe that's only true about milk. She'eno shaveh b'kol. Because you think about it, milk is not shaveh b'kol, right? Because not all animals have the same prohibition on milk. Camels are prohibited to drink their milk because they're tameh. A pig, you can't drink the milk. But a cow, you can drink its milk because it's a tahor animal, or a goat, or other tahor animals. So you might think that's only true about milk. What about blood? What about the blood of a human? Can you drink the blood of a human? Shaveh b'kol. Talmulomar hu. Again, it's the same, seems to be the same word who. Some people change the girsa to zeh, right? And anyways, or x, sorry. But either way, there's another drasha to tell you who tameh bein dam halchishtayim tameh elo tahor, right? So this Breita says that the blood of a human is not the same thing as the blood of an animal. And so, although the Torah prohibits the milk of a kosher of a treif animal, the Torah prohibits blood of any animal. The Torah does not prohibit the milk of a human, even though a human. Well, I'm not going to say that. And the Torah does not prohibit the blood of a human. Now, you're probably wondering, everyone on this call, I assume, what about the third part, right? So we just told you that the prohibition of milk doesn't apply, the prohibition of blood doesn't apply. But what about human flesh, right? What about eating a human? So is that the same thing or not? So it's a very, very important question. I mean, hopefully never relevant, but important question. And so this, in our Girsa actually here, we don't have anything about humans, but I think Tosfos brings, and there's other Girsot in this Braita that add a third component and say the same thing about human flesh. And so don't go eat human flesh, just for the record. But the same question comes up: is how do you compare, eating the meat of a person or a human or of a biped compared to other animals? We don't address that in today's daf. So today we're only addressing the milk and the blood of humans, which are both tahar, or not tahar, but both permitted to eat. Says the Gemara, now, the Amar of Sheshet, and continues with Sheshet, not only is the Torah saying that it's permitted, but you might think there's an Isser D'Rabbanan. But says Rav Sheshet, Afilu mitzvat prisha inbo. There isn't even a mitzvah to be poresh. There isn't even a mitzvah midrabanan not to do it, right? So not only is it permitted min Torah, but there's no prohibition midrabanan from drinking the milk of a human or eating the blood of a human. So how could our Braita say that a mother nurses her child for 24 months and after that it's as if she's nursing him something that's tameh? There's no prohibition on nursing on human milk. Says the Gemara, it's not so simple. Lo kasha. No, there's not a contradiction. Had de parish, had de lo parish. Depends on whether the milk is still in the human or the milk is not in the human. When the milk is parish, very interesting halacha. When the milk is parish, then it's permitted to drink. So if you have a woman's milk in a cup, then you're allowed to drink it. But if a woman's milk from her breast, you're not allowed to drink. It's midrabanan. It's not midoraita. Right? The milk is not tameh. But midoraita, midrabanan, you're not allowed to drink the milk if it has not yet separated from the woman, meaning you can't drink directly from her breast. And that's midrabanan. It's because, question, what's midrabanan? It looks like maybe you're eating something inappropriate. I'm not exactly sure what the drabanan is, but that's an isser drabanan. And that would apply to the kid. And so it would apply to a 3-year-old kid, it would apply to a 5-year-old kid, presumably, that they are not allowed to nurse. They could drink milk from a bottle, as can anyone else, but they're not allowed to nurse beyond a certain point. What's that certain point? So the Braita says 2 years. Of course, that was a machloket. That was Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua said 5 or more years, 4 or 5 years. But it says chilufa b'dam. But the opposite is true about blood, which, remember, with blood, there's also an Isur Drabanan to eat blood. Even though I just told you there's no Isur Doraita. There's an Isur Drabanan, again, it's complicated. But it's the opposite. Blood, you're allowed to eat, presumably, when it's in the body. We'll see what that is in a second. But you're not allowed to eat it when it leaves the body. So unlike milk, which is the opposite, you're not allowed to drink milk from the body, but you can drink it if it's outside. The opposite is true about blood. Kedetanya, as we explicitly said in the following Braita, Dam shal gabi kikar. Right? Let's say there's blood on a piece of bread. Someone bites into a piece of bread and they have a gut bleeding or whatever, and there's blood on the bread. You're not supposed to eat it. Gororosar, you peel it off, and you eat the rest of the bread. But you can't eat that piece that has blood on it. But if there's blood, shebein hashinayim, if you have blood, if your gums are bleeding, so you have blood between your teeth, you don't have to spit it out. Motzitzo ve'eno choshesh, you can swallow it. Because since it never left your body, let's say, you're allowed to swallow it. Right? There's a whole debate. It's a machloket, to be honest, about whether it's only true in the gums because you're swallowing directly. Let's say you have a cut in your finger. Can you suck, from the cut? It feels good, right, to do that. So can you do that and suck the blood because it never left the body, never pooled anywhere? So it's a machloket, Rishonim. But the Braita very clearly says if it's in your gum, you can swallow it. It's not clear what happens if it's in another part of the body. But that's the opposite. Amar Mar now continues going back to the Braita about nursing. Rabbi Yeshua says, even if the kid is 4 or 5 years old, they're allowed to nurse from the mother. But Tanya, the Braita said, Rabbi Yeshua Omer, even if the kid's got a bundle on his back, even if he's carrying around, a load of firewood, he can nurse. He says, well, no, it's the same thing. They used to put the kids to work very early. So even if he's 4 or 5 and he's walking around carrying the garbage or something, you're allowed to go back home and nurse. And Amar Rav Yosef, halachak Rabbi Yeshua, in fact, that's how we paskin, like Rabbi Yeshua, that there is not a limit of a baby nursing for only 2 years. A baby is allowed to nurse much longer. So according to this Gemara, remember, human milk would be permitted only when a kid is beyond the weaning age, which it means it could be any age for that kid, as long as they don't stop nursing, then once it's beyond that age, you're not allowed to any longer drink from a woman's breast, but you can drink it if it's outside of that, if it's, separated from the body. Continues the Gemara, 2 dots, 10 lines from the bottom, 10 lines from the bottom. Tanya, Rabbi Merinos Omer, Rabbi Merinos said, a person who is sick, it's not so clear exactly what the illness is. Rashi here says you have pain in your heart. I don't really know what he's referring to. It says plandaria, which I don't actually know if they say there what that's equivalent to, what kind of heart. Rashi says if you have pain in your heart. Elsewhere, there's other interpretations of this. But a person who's sick on Shabbat, who feels like they really need goat's milk or some other animal milk in order to get better. Remember, probably everyone knows this, you're not allowed to milk an animal on Shabbat because it's an Isser Doraita of Mechamer. Mechamer means when you basically, it's like dash, basically. You're separating milk from the milk ducts, right? So you're taking something out from where it was. That's a prohibition of dash, basically. It's an Isser of an Av Melach. So you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You don't milk animals directly on Shabbos. But Rabbi Marina said a person who's sick can be a gonach, who's a person who's sick, yonek chalav b'Shabbat. He's allowed to drink directly from the animal on Shabbat.
So here it says, actually, in terms of the sickness, it's something that causes him shortness of breath.
And that's what Tosfos says, but Rashi doesn't say that.
No, actually, that's what Rashi says. And then the other thing is goneach means coughing, and he would be coughing up blood due to a lung disease. That's what the Ran says.
Right, but that's Rashi here says it's from the heart. I mean, Tosfos has that shot of the lung.
The pain he feels in the heart, which causes him shortness of breath.
Got it. Okay. I wonder that French word means plandaria.
I don't know it. So actually, it comes from the lungs, I think.
Okay. So this illness, but again, and we had this Gemara elsewhere before, or similar Gemara, that they thought that drinking goat's milk, I think it was specifically goat's milk, but anyways, animal milk would make them feel better, right? Yeah, Rashi says here, refuatav chelav AIDS. It's like goat's milk. So Tosfos here is very bothered by this whole question because obviously if a person's life is in danger, they can do whatever they need to do on Shabbat, right? This is not a chiddush. You can drink from an animal on Shabbos if your life's in danger. So Tosfos here says that it's clearly not a dangerous condition. It's just a uncomfortable condition. Tosfos makes reference to the Gemara in somewhere else. I think in Yevamot he says. In Yevamot, where it talks about where they were hungry and they were drinking. So this is some in-between level. It's not an illness that is life-threatening. It's not just because you're hungry. It's because there's some sickness, but it's not a life-threatening sickness. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Marino said, we used to, a person who has this lung illness, whose name we don't know, yonek chalav b'Shabbat, they can drink milk from an animal on Shabbat. My timer, because yonek is mefarek la'achar yad. Drinking from an animal is not the normal way that you would take milk out of an animal. Just to be clear, I've never been on a farm, but I know enough to know that, right? So the normal way you are do mefarek, that you nurse and that you milk an animal is not by putting your mouth on the animal and drinking, right? So therefore, it's a malacha kila'achar yad, meaning an unusual way to do the malacha. And b'makom tzara lo gazra rabbanan. When you're uncomfortable, when you're in pain, the Rabbanan were not gozer about this. So you're allowed to do it, even though normally you don't milk an animal on Shabbat, and you couldn't presumably do it with your hands. I mean, you couldn't do it with your hands into a cup and then drink the cup, because that's the regular malacha. You can do it with a shinoi by actually drinking straight from the animal. Amar Rav Yosef halachak Rabbi Marinos. In fact, that's how we passed it. Tanya Nachum Ish Galia Omer, were the last narrow line. Let's say a similar case on Shabbat, you have a tzinor, very similar in different ways. You have a pipe, right, like a drain pipe. Shalubo kashkashim. You have it has all kinds of thorns and debris inside of it, so that basically the whole house is overflowing, right? The toilets are blocked up and everything's backing up, and it's a problem. Says the Gemara, you can't fix it regularly on Shabbat because you're not allowed to do that, but you can do it with your foot. You can use your foot to clear out the drain on Shabbat, to kick out the things if you do it in private. My time out, same reason. It's fixing it in an unusual way. Usually when you clean out a drain, you use your hands or you use a tool, but you're using your foot. And so it's not normal. And since it's midrabanan, and since the consequence of it not doing it is that you would lose a lot of money or a lot of possessions, then they're not goes there. And Amar Yosef halacha kinachum ishgalya. In fact, that's how he passed it. Okay. Continues the Gemara back to our nursing questions. The Mishnah continued and said, not the Mishnah, the Braita said that if you are piresh lachar esrim v'arba chodesh, if a child is nursing and then stops, the child is weaned, and then a little time later you decide you want to nurse your child again. Says the Braita that's not appropriate. Chazar v'kiyonik sheketz. Once you stop, you stop. Afterwards, a child is not allowed to go back and nourish, or not they're not allowed, but it's inappropriate to go back and to nurse from the mother. Says what does stopping mean? How long do you have to stop for before this becomes a challenge? V'kama. 3 days. If a child doesn't nurse for 3 days, it means that they're weaned. And then they're not allowed to go back and nurse again from their mother if they're above 24 months old. Now some said, Tani Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva kamei dishmo, shosha yamin. Some said it was a Braita. Tanu Rabbanan, now the Braita says the following. Let's say, this is a continuation of this discussion, but it's a very interesting continuation, because let's say, says the Braita, 2 lines from the bottom, let's say a woman is nursing her baby and her husband dies. So she's a widow, right? And her baby is, say, 12 months old. Says the Braita, and we've had this many times before, Harezu lo titares. She's not allowed to get engaged, but lo tinaseh, she's not allowed to get married to another man. Turn the page, ad esrim va'arba chodesh, until 24 months have passed, divrei Rebbe Meir. And the reason for this is that we're afraid that if she gets married or engaged to somebody else, she will become pregnant from that person, and then her milk will go away, right? Usually when people become pregnant, they no longer can nurse. And therefore her child is going to have no nourishment. And her child doesn't have a father, and there's a lot of details here. The child doesn't have a father because the father is dead, and no one's going to support this child. So it's going to be a danger to the child. And so therefore they prohibited a woman who's nursing a child from remarrying within 24 months of that child's life, because you have to give the child 2 years of nourishment. That was Rabbi Meir said. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, 18 months. Matir b'shmona asar chodesh, you'd have to wait 18 months. So I don't agree that you need 2 years, but you do need 18 months. Now, Amar Rabbi Natan bar Yosef, third line from the top, Rabbi Natan bar Yosef said, Hey nein divrei Beit Shammai, hey nein divrei Beit Hillel. In fact, this machloket of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is based on a much earlier machloket of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Shebeit Shammai omrim esrim v'arba chodesh. Beit Shammai said a woman has to nurse, or you have to protect the child for 24 months. Beit Hillel omrim shmona asar chodesh. Beit Hillel says 18 months. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel ani achriya. Says Rabbi Shimon, now achriya doesn't make any sense here, but so on the side you could see they changed it to ani afaresh. I explain. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, I will explain the divrei haomer esrim v'arba chodesh. According to the one who says 24 months, she can get married at 21 months, right? Because even if she gets married at 21 months and she becomes pregnant on day 1, it takes 3 months of pregnancy until a woman loses her milk. So in the first trimester, she can still nurse. It's only after the first trimester that she will no longer be able to nurse. And therefore, since the minimum time you need is 24 months, she can get married at 21 months of the kid's age. And the divrei omer shmona asar chodesh, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's 18 months, then she can get married at 15 months, right? 3 months before that. The milk only goes away from being produced after 3 months of pregnancy. So even should she become pregnant right away, it's not going to be a concern for the child losing out on the milk. Now, Amar Ula halacha Rabbi Yehuda, sorry. Says Ula, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you have to nurse a child for 18 months before you can get remarried, or 15 months, as we just said. Amar Mar Ukva, it says Mar Ukva specifically, Li hit Rabbi Chanina seit lachad achar chamishasar chodesh. I once wanted to get married to a woman who was previously widowed, who had a baby, and Rabbi Chanina permitted me to get married after 15 months. She'd only been widowed, or again, the widow doesn't matter because the baby could have been 12 months old, then the husband died. So she could have been widowed in that case for 3 months, right? So in many ways, he permitted me to get married. Recall, we had other prohibitions about not getting married too soon because you want to know if she's pregnant. Is she pregnant from the first husband or the second? This is beyond, that was 3 months presumably, but this is beyond that question. This is a question of what about protecting the baby, okay? Now, interesting case, I don't really know, tell you where we are, but it's around 15 lines down. Arise de Abaya, there was a aris, an aris, I don't know how you translate aris, like a worker basically, who works for like a contract.
A sharecropper.
Okay.
Whatever that means.
No, that's literally what it means. But we would think of it as like a contract, an employee that he had, who of Abaya. After the Kameda Abaya, he came in front of Abaya and Amarle, he said, thanks for paying me. It's great. I'm going back home. I have a question. I want to get married to this woman. I want to get Erison. I want to get engaged to this woman who's a widow who has a baby. How long do I have to wait? She's 15 months in. So can I get engaged at 15 months? Right? So Amarle, so he said back then, look, first of all, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda left Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir said 24 months, Rabbi Yehuda said 18 months. We took off 3 months. We passed like Rabbi Yehuda. And furthermore, we said it's really Machlokes Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. And obviously we passed like Beit Hillel, Halacha Beit Hillel. And furthermore, Amar Ula, I remember Ula saying explicitly, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda, we just quoted. And furthermore, Mar Ukva told a story. Li hitir Rabbi Chanina l'seitach chamisha aser chodesh. So kol shekain da'at li'ares. So no problem, go get engaged. Because all of these cases implied that you can even get married at 15 months. You only want to get engaged at 15 months. You're not going to sleep together yet. You're not even going to have a child, and so or become pregnant, and so therefore it's permitted. So that's what he told his Ares. He gave him his share, his money, and he said, "Go home and you can get engaged." Okay, that's not the end of the story. Continues the Gemara. Ki ata the kamed Rav Yosef. Right then, Abaya came in front of Rav Yosef and he said, "The craziest thing happened to me this morning. My sharecropper asked me if he can get married. I told him all the things. I said, no problem." And Rav Yosef said, "You idiot." He didn't say that, but you made a mistake. I'm like, what Rav and Shmuel Damri Tirvayo, Rav and Shmuel both said, that you have to wait 24 months, that you pass like Rabbi Meir here. Not including the day that the child was born. I guess that doesn't count as a day of nursing. And and you don't even count the day you get engaged. You got to wait 24 months between birth of the child and engagement. So you said the wrong halacha. And Abai was like, "Oh my gosh, I made a big mistake. This guy's going to go get married." Rahat batrei plata parsi. He ran after him 3 parsa. Parsa is like 4 mil, so let's say 4 kilometers. So like 10 kilometers. He ran after him, which I don't know how long it takes other people, but it took me like a day. Right. So anyways, he ran after him, and some say it wasn't actually 3 parsa. It was parsa b'chala. It was in the sand. Right, he was running after him in the sand, which you can imagine takes even longer. Right? You don't need everyone who's running in the sand knows it's very, very hard. And he ran after him, lo adruche, and he didn't bump it. He didn't catch him. So basically, there was a sad ending to the story. Abaya gave the wrong psak, and he was not able to correct it. And who knows? This guy might have gone and got married in the wrong fashion. And says Abaya, wow, I had such regret from the story. Hi Mildad the Amar Rabbanan. This reminded me, or this thing that the Rabbanan said, that afilu be'ata bekuch tutcha, even an egg in milk, lo lishri le'inish makom rabbi. Even if someone walks in and asks you the simplest question, that can I eat milk with eggs? Right? Eggs come from a chicken. It's a meat. Milk is this. Everyone knows the answer, right? It's an obvious question. We all know the answer. Even that kind of, Tosfos is a little bothered. It seems a little bit too obvious. Tosfos says maybe it's referring to, remember we had this really interesting case where you shech the chicken, you find eggs inside of it, right? So then there's a whole question, those eggs that are in the chicken, when it's killed, are they meat of the chicken or are they eggs? Can you eat them with milk or not? Either way, what Abaya said is that even very obvious questions, I realize you should never be fast to answer if you don't have permission. L'lishri inish b'makom rabbi, you shouldn't paskin in the place where your teacher is. Not because, it's not because it looks like you are hefker and you're like rejecting your teacher. It's not, you don't have good, you don't have good karma, you don't have good siyata dishmaya. Meaning in a place where a person's teacher is, you should defer to the teacher, even if it seems like a very obvious thing. And look at this case, right? Because I knew the halacha here, right? I knew this teaching of Rabbi Shmuel. I used to teach this, right? I remember telling him Daf Yomi. And I forgot it when the time came. When the person came in front of me, it slipped my mind. I said the wrong thing. And it's not just a memory thing. It's because I was in the same town as my Rebbe. And in those cases, you should always defer because of respect to the teacher, even if you're allowed to. It's not a question of, inappropriate. It's just that you're not going to remember everything you need. And you should try not to paskin even simple things in that sense. Now, continues the Braita after the end of that interesting story. Last word on the line, Tanura Banan. What if a woman is natna benad lemeineket? Right? This woman is widowed. She has a baby. We said she's not allowed to get married for 24 months, or 12 or 18, but say we paskin 24. What if she gives the child over to a nursemaid? So then can she get married? She's no longer nursing the child, right? Or if or if she weans the child. Mate, let's say the child dies, right? So can she get married? There's no baby to nurse anymore. Says the Braita, she's allowed to get married right away because there's no more responsibility to nurse this child. Unfortunately, the child's not alive, or the child was weaned, or the child is given over to another person. Rav Papa, Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua, several of them have uvta ki hamatnita. So Rav Papa, Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua thought that, okay, let's do this practically. Let's take the next case of a woman whose child, say, died in infancy, and allow her to get married right away. Amrulei ahu safta. There was a safta. We don't know who this. We often think we have a hu saba, right? We have that old grandfather, but this is a hu safta. This is the old grandma. I guess when you deal with nursing, this is who comes up, right? So this safta said to me, "B'didi havi uvda." The joke is, of course, it's the wife of Eliyahu Navi, right? But anyways, because we always, when we say Ahu Saba, we often say it's referring to Eliyahu Navi. But anyways, this Safta, this grandmother said to me, B'didi havi uvda. In fact, this happened to me. I don't know, maybe I was widowed and I had a child who died and I wanted to get remarried. But also the Rav Nachman. And Rav Nachman told me I can't do it. I knew Rav Nachman. I asked him. He prohibited me from getting married. Says, how is that true? Eini var Rav Nachman sharlei the bereish galuta. Rav Nachman permitted the people in the Bereish Galuta to get married when they had a child who was given over to a wet nurse, right? So how can this woman say that Rav Nachman prohibited me and he permitted those people in the Bereish Galuta? Says, well, the Bereish Galuta, remember, was the government, right? It was the king's house or the leader's house. Shani Bereish Galuta below Hadarbu. They will not go back, right? So they will not. If they get someone to nurse their child, you're not worried that person's going to stop working for them, right? They have a lot of leverage. But a regular person, you can hire someone to nurse your child, and 2 weeks later they can walk out, right? And then you're stuck. Because if the woman gets married and she doesn't have milk anymore because she's pregnant, then that child will have no nourishment. And so it could be that Rav Nachman only permitted it in the situation where you don't have to worry about the deal falling apart. Of course, that only addresses the nursemaid, right? What about if the child died? Or what about if the child is weaned? And so there, it could be that he doesn't disagree about those cases. That's only the case of where the child was given over to another woman to nurse, that Rabbi Nachman will be machmir. Now, Amar Rav Papi, say Rav Papi, well, 1 second. But what about the following Braita? Why do you need this case of this old woman, the Safta, who said, I remember Rav Nachman telling me something? There's a Beferish Braita which says that. Amar Rav Papi, Atomo Tizbram, the other time you don't know this svara from the following Braita. What does the Braita say? 3 lines from the last narrow lines. Let's say you have a woman who's in a bad marriage. She's running away to her father's house. She and her husband, whatever the reason is, right there, it's not working, and she is on her way out. She wants to get out of that marriage. Or there's, she lives there, but everybody knows that they're fighting all the time. And again, we're making all the assumption that she's not going to become pregnant because of this. Or her husband's in prison, so he can't sleep with her, right? He's in jail. Or her husband was overseas before, we'll see what happened. Or her husband is very old and he's not capable of sleeping with her or of having a child. Or he's sick. Or she is sterile, right? She can't have a child. Or skena, or islanded, or ketana. All of these cases, right, which are women who can't have children. Or hamapelet achar mitat bala. Or listen to this case: a woman's husband dies, So, right, we're not sure if she's pregnant. These are all cases where we have to worry she might become pregnant, right? She can't go marry another person. She might be pregnant from her first husband. But what if all these cases, they were fighting? He was away. He was in prison. She was too young to become pregnant. He was too old to make her pregnant. Or the last case, which is even very extreme, she had a miscarriage after her husband died, right? So she was married to a man. She was pregnant. He died. She then had a miscarriage. So obviously she's not pregnant now, right? It's impossible. So in all of these cases, She'ina Ruyale later, a woman who can't have children, we have to wait 3 months anyways. So even though it's impossible for her to be pregnant, the fact is that once the Rabbanan make a takana that you wait 3 months, it applies to every single woman, even in situations where it doesn't make sense. Rabbi Yossi says, I disagree. Rabbi Yossi was matir le'ares v'nasei miyad. Rabbi Yossi said, look, if the facts are that she can't be pregnant because they didn't live together, he was in prison, she's past age where she can have children, etc., then she can get married to someone else right away. There's no concern. And says Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Meir b'gzerotav. You passing like Rabbi Meir, right? So Rabbi Meir here says that the 3 months is a set time. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. By extension, the same thing is true about nursing, right? If you make a rule that there's 24 months about nursing, it doesn't matter if the circumstances don't apply, if the kid is given over to a wet nurse. According to Rabbi Meir, apparently the halacha is the gzeirah. So you don't need Rav Chanina, you don't need old woman, a Safta, to tell you this from the name of Rav Nachman. And they said, you're right, in fact, we didn't know this Braita, so thank you for teaching it to us. So you're right. Had we known this Braita, we would not have had to talk to this old woman who had her story from Rav Nachman. Says the what's the halacha? Hilchata is that if the child dies, mutar. Okay, we don't take it that far. If a woman is widowed and her child dies, she can then marry another person because obviously she's not nursing a child anymore. But if it's gemalto, if she weans the child, it's a sort, right? Because, of course, we're worried that she's going to wean the child on purpose, right? Meaning she wants to get married. Her husband's dead, unfortunately. She wants to marry a new person. She needs to marry someone maybe, but she's got this baby. Unfortunately, she got this baby, and she's going to wean the child early so that she can get married. And so we don't trust her, and therefore we don't allow her to get remarried, even if she weans the child, because we don't want her to wean the child prematurely. Now, Mar Bar Ravashi Amar Afila Meitanami Asur. You know what? Even if the child dies, she's not allowed to get remarried. You know why? Because maybe she'll kill her child so she can get remarried. Dilma Katlale Lazla Mitzvah. Maybe she's so desperate to get married and she's got this baby from her previous husband and she has such, I don't want to say anger, but she has such desire and need to get married that she'll go to the extent that she'll kill her child. And so if we allow her to get married if the child's dead, we're afraid we're going to lead to her killing her own child. And in fact, there was a story of how the Uvda, the Chanakte, was a story and there was a woman who choked her child in order to be allowed to get married. Says the Gemara, but that's wrong. Belohi, that is not considered to be normal behavior. Ahi Shotahavi, that woman was clearly insane, right? There's no question that she had whatever issues that led her to do that. It's not a normal human behavior. And even a woman who's desperate to get married will not do this to harm her child in order to get married. And therefore, if the child does die, unfortunately, which is very, very common, right? Then we allow her to get remarried. We do not assume or think, unless there's reason to evidence to the contrary, that a woman is going to harm her own child in order for her to be able to get remarried. I love that statement. Women are not likely to choke their children, right? So it is very, we can all agree on that, right? It's very far-fetched to make any gzera, assuming that a woman's going to lead to her child's death just so she can get remarried. And therefore, we do not assume that unless, there was a case that happened. Unfortunately happened. Women have unfortunately killed their children, as have men. But unless there's some reason to think that's happened, we don't assume it and we allow her to get remarried. Continues the Braita, the fourth wide line, the 2 dots. Tanura Banan says the Braita, Haresh Natula Ben Lahanik. Let's say a woman takes a job, right? That she's hired to take a child to nurse, right? It says the Braita, Haresh Lo Tanikimo Lo Benav Lo Ben Chaverta. She can't work on the side, right? If you hire a woman to nurse your child, you're expecting to get all her milk. She can't also nurse her own child, and she can't take another job. It's like having, your daycare and bring other kids in, right? Which would be permitted if you revealed it, right? But it's not this. Here you can't, because there's only so much milk, and basically you're giving up. She was hired to nurse this child, and she's giving her milk to another child. Says the bride continues, Paskat Kima, even if they only agreed on a small amount, she has to be Ochelet Harbe. Part of a woman's responsibility if she takes a job to nurse a child is that she's going to eat enough to make enough milk. And so that's part of the responsibility. And she's not allowed to eat things that are bad for the milk. Again, because she took a job to nurse nurse this baby. And so since she took a job to nurse the baby, she has to eat the right foods as part of her job. Hash says, well, no, 1 second. You said she can't nurse her own son. Hash ben boy. You said if she took a job to nurse a child, she can't nurse her son or someone else's kid. Well, if you can't nurse your own kid, certainly you can't nurse someone else's kid. So no, it's not true. Because you might have thought, right? If it's her own son, she's going to give a lot of milk. She's going to give all the extra to that son. If she takes another kid, maybe it's because she has extra milk. If she didn't have extra, she wouldn't have do it. That no, she's not allowed to take any other children to nurse. Now, continued the Braita, Paskat Kima, if you only set aside in the contract a small amount of money for her for that food, it doesn't matter. She has a responsibility. She has to eat a lot of food to make good milk. So who has to pay for that? She's got to pay for it herself. She signed a bad contract, right? She agreed to do something. She should have gotten better supplies, but it's her responsibility. And finally, she's not allowed to eat things that are bad for her milk. What are these? My ninhu, Rav Kahana, Kegon Kashot. Kashot, they usually translate as hops. I don't know, Miriam, if you have all these translations here. Rashi says humlin, which is hops. And chaziz, which is actually some kind of grass from grain, I guess. How do they translate chaziz? Miriam?
1 second. I was trying to find chaziz. Where is that?
It's grass. It's some kind of grain that grows on the kernel of the wheat. I don't know.
Hops.
Yeah, that's
grain sprouting.
What is it? What's it? Oh,
grain sprouting.
Right. Like bean sprouts, right? But grain sprouts. And dagim ktanim, small fish, these are all bad for the milk for some reason. And adama, and eating dirt is bad for milk, again. And Abaya said, afilu kara b'chavusha, even kara, which is, I think, pumpkin, and chavusha, which I have no idea what chavusha is. Does he say what chavusha is?
Squash and quince.
Quince, okay. Chavusha is quince. I don't know what that is either. And Rav Papa says,
quince is actually a fruit. It's right. It's like a sour kind of fruit.
Okay. And Rav Papa says, afilu kara, again, which usually means a pumpkin or squash, and kufra are the immature dates, right? And Rav Ashi says, afilu kamcha v'harsina, which is like the very salty, briny fish. Like the
fish hash.
Yeah. All of these things, minayo paski chalva, some of them make her milk stop, so that's why she can't have them. And minayo achri chalva, some of them make the milk taste bad, and so the kid doesn't like it. And so either way, these are foods that she's not allowed to drink if she takes on a job of agreeing to be a nursemaid. So we're going to stop today. We've got to run.
Ellie?
Yes?
Was there ever an answer why you can't become engaged?
So the reason you can't become engaged is because we assume that once you get engaged, you might be engaging in intercourse and she might become pregnant.
Really?
Yeah. We don't have. Again,
is that a general concern? Like, has that come up before?
It's come up before, yeah, absolutely. But remember, we came up with truma. We came up before these kind of. Remember, we had a whole issue: a woman who's engaged to Yisrael, she can only read truma. But the bigger issue is that this is a health issue. Essentially, we're really worried about the life of this kid, and so we're very machmir, as you can see, even though at the expense of this woman, unfortunately.
Is that the way in terms of like the nursing? Is that the way we paskin? That like a woman who nurses is not allowed to nurse another child also?
So I don't really can't answer psak, but I would just point out that obviously the whole question of whether any of this is true in the era of formula is discussed very much by the poskim. And I know that
Right.
there are many situations in which the poskim are matir a woman who's a widow who's got an infant to
Yep.
get remarried, even though the kid's 6 months old, because there's other alternatives for feeding children nowadays, right? So I
There
think
might, in those days, there might not have been enough nutrition for the mother to successfully breastfeed 2 children. She
Right.
might not have been having enough calories or nutrition in the food to do that.
I don't know. I'm mentioning it because my father was actually nursed by a woman who had another child at the same time, and she was nursing both of them. So,
well, so I think you're asking physically. I mean, I don't know exactly, but I know there's plenty of people who have twins who I think nurse both their kids, right? I think that exists
Right.
nowadays. Maybe even triplets. I don't know, but it's hard to do 3 at a time. But I think that some of it depends, as you see from the case of Rav Nachman and the Reish Galuta, right? If they have the financial means, which I think today you would assume is the status for everybody, right? Then that changes the halakha. A lot of it depends on what's acceptable at that time.
okay.
Okay, everyone, have a great day. We're meeting tomorrow morning on Zoom at 8:30. I hope 7:30. Sorry, 7:30.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Ellie.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.